Hello, welcome back to Singapore Perspectives 2026. I hope you had a good break. We're about to start session 2 now. The title for session 2 is New Ways to Talk Through Tough Topics, Testing Different Modalities of Citizen Engagement. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Justin Lee, Head of IPS Policy Lab, who will be moderating session 2. Justin, over to you.
Thank you, Laurel. We'll have introductions to the distinguished panelists later, but for now, let me tell you a bit more about this session. The session is about how to talk through tough problems. It's about citizen deliberation and engagement. But first, I would like to introduce also a bit about Policy Lab. So my name is Justin, and I'm the head of Policy Lab. It's a relatively new unit in IPS, and we are set up as a policy innovation unit to look at new ideas or solutions we want to test in Singapore. So the easiest way to describe the work we do, it's something like R&D. It's design and innovation work, but it's not always creative. Sometimes it's more boring, it's more scientific and evidence-based. So merely we have to translate what the evidence is into a local context, or sometimes we get to exercise our creativity. We can find things to try that we've not done before. I'll give you an example. For example, we've gone down to homeless shelters and youth drop-in centers, and we've equipped the homeless people as well as the youth to make decisions together with the professionals to figure out if that leads to better social outcomes. We plan to soon start inclusive business incubator, where we will rove to different neighborhoods to help communities start community-owned enterprises. So we get to do fun things like that, which also means that our work is different from just research or think tank work. We have to build the implementation capabilities to do this and hope for mainstreaming. Now, let me tell you a bit more about this work stream of ours on citizen deliberation and public engagement. One way I think about it is that there are different forms of engagement. So based on the theme that we have today, right, is on polarization, but not all issues are polarizing. There's a group of engagement strategies that is basic, right? How can we listen to each other and understand each other? And and maybe listening and understanding is a low bar. Maybe even better, you develop empathy, you understand, you connect with each other. And even better, you develop relationships with people you don't. So based on the social lab survey early in the morning, one of the findings was that, we tend to just kind of have friends who are similar to us. Are there opportunities for us to make friends with others from different backgrounds? So there's one strand of engagement strategies. Another strand I think about more functionally different is more deliberative, right? So the dialogues that you have are to come to kind of figure out how do we arrive at a position or even better consensus or something that we currently disagree about. And even better, find solutions or make decisions about it. So that's another strand of public engagement strategies. The third one is more rare. All these citizen engagement strategies require some kind of broker or platform or sponsor. There are certain types of citizen initiatives which rely on citizens' own initiative. They are proposing to have this dialogue, and then they have them on their own, sometimes with some support. So that's the background of this. I suppose the role of Policy Lab then is to test different varieties of these public engagement strategies to try and figure out what works for whom under what conditions. Now, I want to go to show you a video of one experiment that we just completed in November 2025 called the Consensus Conference, and one we plan to start very soon called the Citizens Reassemble. So over to the video, please.
Hello. The Consensus Conference is a structured way to bring very different people into the same room to deliberate on sensitive or potentially polarizing issues and work out two things, where everyone can accept a statement or what we term common ground, and where they cannot, for now, what we term no-go zones. We recruited a diverse panel of Singapore citizens, permanent residents, and foreigners on an employment pass or long-term visit passes.
It was the need to hear more voices. The fact that in social media especially, we're stuck in our echo chambers. We're kind of stuck with hearing the same kind of ideas and we don't learn anything new.
I do have a lot of friends from all walks of life, particularly foreigners, as well as locals. So I wanted to be more inclusive, have more interesting conversations with them, especially from different perspectives.
It specifically stated that it's going to listen to the views between the foreigners and the local-born Singaporeans and to find out what causes the growing angst that's happening in Singapore towards them.
I wanted to be part of the conversation and see if I can help drive change. So this seemed like the perfect opportunity as a foreigner to be part of the entire process.
Participants receive an information kit, they read background materials, then heard from an expert and had the time to clarify and ask questions. Then we moved into the deliberation and drafting in small groups and then as a full panel of 24. Participants worked through the draft statements on community life, jobs, education, and finally openness and multiculturalism. Then came the consensus stage. For each statement that participants proposed, they had to respond to the statement, "Can I live with this?" If everyone said, "I can live with it," the statement became common ground, 100%. If even one person could not accept it, it moved into mere consensus or no-go. If they could not live with it, they would share the reasons why and what tweaks were needed to the position. The power in the process lies with the proposer of the statement. If she or he could live with the revised position, then the process repeats itself.
I felt that they don't just separate you into two lines, but they give you a chance to explain to the rest of the group why you disagree with the statement.
On day one, it was a little bit challenging because we're not sure how we deal with each other. But as time goes on, because we have the same objective, therefore we were very open in expressing our viewpoints.
There were moments when I was a little upset actually because I was wondering, why can't they understand what I'm trying to say? Then it occurred to me, I think they may have the same challenge as well. And that was the purpose of the session, is actually to hear voices that don't reflect our own thoughts.
People were very open, even when they were angry about something. They were just saying it out loud. And I'm just feeling like, wow, it must also sometimes be difficult for the other person, on the other hand, to receive such emotions.
I'm really glad to have been part of it and to have been able to share my views as well and help to dispel perhaps, hopefully, some myths about the role of foreigners in this country or to what extent we're able to access various types of resources.
Finally, the participants formed a writing group to draft the residents' report and then invited comments and edits from the rest of the panel. On top of that, they co-developed a community project which they are now considering for full support.
It came from my heart, really. And I really felt that I wanted to make a difference together as a team.
Fraternity is about seeing one another as part of the same we, even when we disagree. Reaching 100% consensus on any statement about a sensitive topic is not easy. When they manage to do it and then write a report together, it creates a sense of joint ownership and pride. Over time, if we run more of these processes, we can grow a wider culture where Singaporeans disagree on some things, yet see each other as partners looking out for the best interest of Singapore.
Why reassembling? I suppose the idea is that people might be more comfortable in their existing echo chambers. So if I'm an angry artist, I will talk to other angry artists about how big tech is exploiting us. And then big tech will of course talk to their investors and think about making money. But how often do you get the angry artist to talk to the tech person, to talk to other artists who love AI? We will do polling first. We'll ask people about their opinions about AI and its effects. We will also ask them specifically what they think about policy solutions or instruments. We will deliberately choose people who have different opinions and then form small groups out of them. And then based on that small group discussion, we will have a deliberative workshop. They will be tasked with arriving at some kind of synthesis or new idea or how to overcome this issue. And if the small group can achieve consensus within that group, that idea goes back to polling. So we'll poll 600 people, small group of 40 to 100, and then the ideas go back out to polling to the 600.
We're not just looking at people to reach sort of a middle ground. We're actually looking to see whether the different opinions can be complemented by one another and whether or not people can actually arrive at very important points of tension that can be overcome by a policy solution.
If you did a survey, you can get a lot of people, maybe it's representative of the population. But surveys don't allow you to iterate and think and have a dialogue and deliberate with other people. Even just having that ability to interact and understand where all these people are coming from would be a good beginning. Who we are, what we do, why we think the way we think, and then developing kind of empathy and understanding of a different point of view that you don't hold. That's even higher call. If we arrive at a solution that we can all agree on, then wow, that's magic. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that video, gave you a snippet of the experiments that we're doing. I'm in a position very pleased to be able to welcome our guest. Let me introduce to you SMS Tan Kiat Hao. He's the Senior Minister of State at the Ministry of Digital Development and Information and MOH. Welcome, SMS Tan. Let me read a bit of your background so that our audience gets a sense of the important work that you do. So at MDDI, he focuses on strengthening Singapore's cybersecurity ecosystem. At MOH, Mr. Tan drives technology adoption to support healthcare workforce through AI and automation. Of course, Mr. Tan is also the chair of REACH, which is how he's arriving today in his capacity. He's facilitating whole of government engagement with Singaporeans on national issues. And so thank you, REACH Chairman, also for this partnership, IPS, on doing some of these public engagement experiments with us. Next, we have Nick Thomas. Nick is my colleague at the IPS Policy Lab. He's a very new addition to the lab, and he's already done so much. He has almost 2 decades of experience in government and civic engagement. And actually, he was formerly at the Singapore Government Partnership Office with Don, our third speaker later. I'll leave Nick to talk more about his work, but just to note that, Nick already does so much. And at the same time, he's also pursuing a PhD in comms and new media in NUS. So I don't know how you do it, but thank you so much for contributing to IPS and to this partnership with REACH. And finally, we have Dawn. Dawn is a practitioner in the fields of organizational development, public participation, and strategic foresight. She's been involved in numerous public engagements such as Forward Singapore, our Singapore Conversation, and Emerging Stronger Conversation. So all the big conversations, Dawn is there, but I'm sure she's participated in many of the small ones. She was previously serving as the coordinating director at MCCY, Singapore Government's Partnership Office. So the structure for today is that we'll have Dawn start first. Dawn will kind of paint the evolution of and trajectory of collaborative governance and citizen participation in Singapore. Then over to SMS Tan to talk about specifically REACH's role, especially now, last year's REACH celebrated its 40th anniversary on the government's role in public engagement. And then down to Nick, who will share more details about the citizens, the consensus conference that we just did. So over to you, Dawn.
Thank you, Justin. And hello, everyone. It's really a delight to be here. Let me start by giving a bit of context to what I'm about to say. As Justin mentioned, I have been involved with the field of public engagement for many years now. I counted, it's just a little over 25 years, so it's a quarter of a century. And it started way back in the 1990s. I started as the secretariat of the Singapore 21 committee. That was a committee led by then Minister Teo Chee Hean. It was to reshape Singapore's hardware, and since then, many other national conversations, and also the formation, more recently, of the Singapore Government Partnerships Office. So since this panel is about new ways of talking, I thought it begged the question, what are the old ways of talking? So I thought I'd just take a wide-angle lens over these last 25 plus years that I've been in the field to share 3 observations of how the way we've talked has changed over the decades. And the first thing I wanted to say is that we've shifted from not just feedback to also feed forward. Let me explain what I mean. So feedback is when there's something already in existence. It could be a program, a policy, some kind of scheme, and then the public is invited to give views on it, how it can be improved. And it's a form of engagement that's quite well established these days in government. Way back in the 1980s, we set up the feedback unit to sort of more formally and institutionally receive feedback from the public. Now, fast forward several decades, and the government now also often seeks views before the policy and program is in place, and then feeds these views forward into the program and policy design. So that's what I call feed forward. So for instance, in advance of introducing, say, a new bill, a draft is often put out into the public domain for the public to give its views, and then the government will often bring these views together, present back a summary, and then take these views into the design of the legislation. So that's feedback to feed forward. The second shift I've observed over the last 20 plus years is a shift from issue-based engagement to broad-based engagement. So the public is often engaged on specific issues like, say, public housing, education, healthcare, sustainability. But in the last decades, there's also been a very clear shift towards broad-based engagement. And I think the clear marker of this is all these national conversations that Justin made reference to, our Singapore Conversation and Forward Singapore being the most recent one. These invite the public to participate in shaping the broad national agenda. And often they don't have the policy already cooked back end. They're really genuinely trying to seek the public's view and aspiration for what they want Singapore to become in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So that's issue-based to broad-based. And then the third shift over the last decades has been a shift from consultation to co-creation. So consultation is a way of talking where the leader seeks views, then takes in those views, and then the leader still has the final decision. And that's obviously a valid form of engagement. But in recent years, consultation has also been complemented by a new way of engaging where the leader and the participants are co-creators, collaborators, partners. The public is invited not just to give their views, but also to be part of the process of deliberation, reshaping ideas, sometimes even putting experiments into the ground or implementing them. And we saw an example of that in the video that was just shown. So these 3 shifts, feedback to feed forward, issue-based to also broad-based, and consultation to also co-creation. In a nutshell, we've basically widened and deepened the level of engagement over the last few decades. And so why have all these changes happened? Obviously, it wasn't just a magical thing. It was in response to what was going on in Singapore and what's going on in the wider world. The short answer is that our people have changed. Singaporeans now have aspirations, desires, and appetites to be engaged. And so we need to experiment and try new ways of talking. And I think externally also, the governance environment has become a lot more challenging. And many of the decisions that we have to make actually involve quite difficult trade-offs. And in other words, the tough topics are only going to grow. And therefore, we are going to need new ways of engaging. So I thought I would just conclude by sharing 3 thoughts about what this means for how we need to talk as a nation and as a society. And my first thought is to those of us on this seminar who might be conveners of these conversations. I'm talking, of course, to people in this room who might be public officers, but also actually people who lead organizations. Like if you run a business and you've got, say, 100 employees or 50 employees or 1,000 employees, do you make decisions and mandate them, or do you engage them? These are questions worth considering. So if you're a convener of any sort, my invitation is that we consider experimenting with new methods. In Singapore, our repertoire has widened. There are new methods, and we're going to hear more about that from Nicholas later on the Consensus Conference. So my invitation is really to be willing to experiment and try new methods of engaging. The second invitation is for those of us who would consider ourselves interested citizens or members of Singapore society, or people who are corporate citizens, people who are in our organizations but are really interested in what goes on in the organization beyond just the sort of being a passive member. And so the invitation for you then, when you see a call to participate, please do so. And if you care about something enough, don't wait to be invited or to do something about it. There are many avenues for you to do so. At the national policy level, I would urge 2 starting places would be number 1, SMS Get House own Reach. Reach is a wonderful platform for you to just get engaged, get looped in, to know what's going on and be able to give your views. And then the second is the team and the organization I used to be part of, the Singapore Government Partnerships Office, which is very sincere about wanting to help citizens be able to take the next step in doing something about things they care about. And then my final invitation is a plea all round, and I know we'll unpack this further. It's not easy to talk about tough topics. It's emotive. It sometimes touches on our own identity. And so the plea is to be patient with each other. There will certainly be rough edges. There will be challenges when we learn to engage each other in new ways and on difficult topics. And the tendency is to straight away have our hackles raised when we're dealing with a difficult issue. So my plea really is to form a great deal of empathy, give ourselves the latitude and the buffer to try things and maybe to fail from time to time. I know it's easier said than done, but I will pause there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Don. I always love the way that you help succinctly paint a summary of this actually quite complicated evolution of public engagement. So from feedback to feed forward, from issue-based to broad-based, and finally from consultation to co-creation. So thanks for that. Now over to thank you. I wonder what do you think of Don's implicit suggestion that maybe the feedback unit could now be called the feed-forward unit? Over to you, SMS.
Yeah. Hi. Firstly, a very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having me at this wonderful conference. And very happy to see many familiar faces, all practitioners and all stakeholders in this community. And thank you, Don, for suggesting that people can sign up to Reach and SGPO, 2 wonderful organizations, very, very passionate people. And so to reference what Don said, Reach as an organization, we celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. We were born as a feedback unit, so this is our feed-forward version of ourselves. But let me speak briefly about the theme of the conference, and my remarks is around how we are thinking at the Reach level, at the government level, how we think about building bridges in a changing Singapore. So as a thought exercise, so imagine Singapore as a series of islands, not the physical islands that make up our geography, but social islands, communities separated by differences in background, experience, and perspectives. And look around the world. Look what's happening around the world. I think it's quite clear that this is not what we want to see for Singapore and Singaporeans, to feel that they are isolated in their own little island. Think about 60 years ago. We celebrated 60 years of independence last year, 2025. 60 years ago, when Singapore just became independent, we just had about 1 million people living in Singapore. Fast forward 60 years later, where we are today, we have grown from a developing port city into a cosmopolitan global financial hub, a business hub, and home to about 6 million residents of diverse background. So it's not just the biggest transformation that we see around our urban landscape economy, but also our social composition. Singapore is becoming more diverse. Even among our 3.6 million citizens, we are seeing more marriages across ethnic lines, as well as cross-national marriages. Our society now includes first-generation immigrants, third-generation Singaporeans, and everyone in between. This diversity in background, culture, and heritage naturally leads to greater diversity in perspectives, values, aspirations, and concerns. At the same time, we also see the rise of social media, which is deepening divides and accelerating the spread of divisive narratives. Algorithm-driven feeds can trap us into echo chambers, amplify division, rather than building understanding. And we see around the world, from Brexit to the political divide in countries like America, no country is spared from how online discourse can fracture social cohesion. And surveys done by institutions like IPS show a shift in the issues that Singaporeans are concerned about. 20 years ago, Singaporeans worried primarily about jobs and healthcare. Today, more Singapore residents want the government to be more involved in sensitive issues such as race and religion. There are also concerns that span climate change, immigration, LGBTQ issues, and geopolitical tensions. So these are not just policy issues. They touch our deepest beliefs about identity and togetherness. So the topic for this conference on feedback to fraternity is a timely one, an important one. So what is fraternity? And why does it matter? Well, I believe that's important. Fraternity in modern society cannot be assumed. It's something that we must actively build and actively invest in. And this is why what we do at Reach has been about building this sense of community and reaching out to people. So I mentioned earlier, we are 40 years old, started off as a feedback unit, primarily being a one-way bridge between the citizens to the government. And as Dawn mentioned earlier, typically it's more issue-based. We have a bill, a topic, and we want feedback from people. But we have evolved over the last 40 years, as Singapore has evolved. So our role today is to be facilitators, bridge builders, to help people build stronger connections in the community and form new shared norms amidst the differences. And we believe that we can only do so through deeper dialogue, genuine co-creation and collaboration among people, and more importantly, creating space where Singaporeans and people can come in living in Singapore can connect with one another, not just with the government. So over the past few years, Reach has gone beyond the traditional dialogues and surveys to better engage and connect with Singaporeans. We've explored and piloted more than 10 different engagement modalities thus far, including very interesting ones. For example, interactive theatre, where participants are presented with interrelated issues through a play and exchange views in real time. We've also tried gamification, where we used conversation cards to build trust among participants before dwelling into discussions on sensitive issues with one another. And we also tried citizen deliberative panels in partnership IPS, namely the consensus conference seen in the video earlier. We have also conducted interactive listening points with activities like gachapon giveaways to encourage participation. We've embraced social media through vodcast series, where panelists share their views on polarizing issues by revisiting past incidents in Singapore. And also use social media messaging platforms like Telegram, where we brought online community participants together to share views on trending topics. So the different modalities have allowed us to engage more Singaporeans, and we have engaged close to 210,000 Singaporeans last year in 2025. In just 1 year, 210,000 Singaporeans, over 65 dialogues, listening points, and digital campaigns. More importantly, participants continue the conversations afterwards, form communities, and take action together. So it's not just coming in to share views, talk among one another, but really forming communities and, importantly, taking action together. So we have evolved Reach over the last 40 years. Over the last few years, especially, we tried out different ways to engage, to experiment different modalities, but we are not innovating or experimenting just for the sake of novelty. We are doing so to draw out deeper feelings and live realities, creating an environment for authentic conversations and build deeper, stronger understanding across communities. Every engagement builds trust and shared ownership and brings us closer to co-creating better outcomes and solutions for Singaporeans today and tomorrow. So that brings me to our partnership with IPS on the Consensus Conference, which Nicholas will cover in more detail later. The Consensus Conference on Local Foreign Integration was one of our most recent, and must say, one of the most interesting experiments yet. The results exceeded expectation. Over 90% reported positive experiences despite deliberating on a very contentious issue. Participants formed voluntary working groups and co-authored a 48-page residence report. This demonstrates that when we create the right conditions for fraternity, Singaporeans do not just want to be heard, they want to work together across differences. And I went by the Consensus Conference and I spoke to the participants. I must say that it's quite a interesting experience and something that actually is very reflective for the participants themselves. It's a very nice experiment that we've tried, and we can discuss it later on as well. So let me conclude by saying that 40 years ago, REACH began building bridges between citizens and the government. Today, we are helping Singaporeans build bridges with one another. Tomorrow, these bridges will carry us forward as one people, one nation. Here's what I've learned in the last 40 years. The government cannot create social cohesion alone. We can create the conditions for engagement, but cannot manufacture or legislate trust or fraternity. These are built through relationships, honest dialogues, and willingness of everyone to stay connected, stay open to different perspectives, and more importantly, work together even when we may not agree with everything each other says. Moving forward, REACH will continue to expand our experimental approaches. We are committed to creating more spaces where Singaporeans can safely discuss what matters most to them. The reality is this: if we do not talk about differences, friction will escalate. If we do not build bridges across divides, these divides will only deepen. So work together with us to build a more connected community, a more integrated, more cohesive Singapore. And to our students, challenge the echo chambers in your schools, universities, and social media feeds. And to our academics, research what further strengthens social cohesion and bring your insights and perspectives and learnings to the community where people can take action. And to our practitioners, where I know many of you are participating in this conference, work together with us to create spaces for different communities to connect and share common views of how to build a better Singapore. And toward all of us, I echo what Dawn said earlier, all of us have an agency and ownership to play our part. Let us choose connection over division in our daily interactions. Let us embrace conversations that may feel uncomfortable but are necessary. And let's build Singapore together. Let's strengthen the bridges that bind us. And I wish everyone a wonderful conference. I look forward to hearing your perspectives and insights too. Thank you.
Thank you, SMS Kiat Hao, for that. I look forward to hearing more about how to build bridges across. And congratulations on REACH's 40th anniversary again, and appreciate the partnership with IPS. Now I would like to hand over to Nick to tell us more about the Consensus Conference. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Justin. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, let me extend my appreciation to REACH for partnering with the IPS Policy Lab on this experiment. Dawn painted the ecosystem. SMS talked about the governance landscape. I will speak specifically on one of the policy experiments that we did recently. I also want to send a note of thanks to the IPS team who worked on this: Justin, Wilson Goh, Aisha Najib, Wong Kang Lee, and Cecilia Kwek. As a panel between Dawn, SMS, and myself and Justin, we agreed not to use slides. So I'll do my best to reflect the research study as best as we can. SMS kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but just play along with me. Let me start by asking a question. Take 24 people, Singapore citizens, permanent residents, foreigners. Put them in a room. Give them questions, really difficult questions on jobs, education, multiculturalism, and community life. Ask them to generate statements that every single person in the room can live with. Not majority, not 50.01%, but unanimous, 100%. I'm curious what you think. So I put up a poll. I invite you to click yes if you believe that they reach 100% consensus on any statement, and click no if you believe that they did not. That means they arrived at 99%, 98%, 50%. So yes, if you believe they arrived at 100%. We'll come back to this poll towards the end of my presentation. We ran this experiment of the Consensus Conference on local foreign integration in Singapore. Let me share what we found towards the end of this presentation. But first, why did IPS Policy Lab run this experiment? Dawn painted the different areas, SMS as well, and SMS highlighted that if we do not bring up these issues, they will rise up inevitably. The central reason for the Policy Lab's experiment on local foreign integration and finding consensus is that Singapore's demography is shifting. Non-residents have grown from about 3% of the population in 1970 to about 31% reported last year. The resident fertility rate also stands at 0.97. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong observed last year in a social media post that Singapore is and has always been an immigrant nation. The question is whether we can continue to welcome newcomers while maintaining social cohesion. But there are signs of strain. IPS Social Lab found that if immigration were mismanaged, more than a third of Singaporeans anticipated anger against particular communities, and more than a third anticipated weakened national identity. Government policy can address resource allocation, jobs, university places, housing, but what policy cannot manufacture, as SMS articulated earlier, is mutual understanding, trust, and a sense of fraternity. Robert Putnam's seminal research on social capital is instructive here. He distinguished between bonding capital, ties within groups, and bridging capital, ties across groups. In diverse communities, Putnam found that residents tend to hunker down in the short to medium run. They trust neighbors less and participate less in civic life. But over time, diverse societies can develop new forms of solidarity. They can build bridging social capital. The key word is can. It does not happen automatically. So we asked in this research experiment, in Singapore's context, can structured deliberation and quality facilitation build that bridging social capital? On local foreign integration, one of the most contested issues we face. So what did we do? You have seen the video, so you have a sense of the consensus conference method. But let me just take a short step back. What is a consensus conference? It is a structured deliberative process developed in Denmark in the 1980s. The method tests whether the process itself can surface latent tensions and thereafter enable finding common ground. Let me just, importantly, sorry, give me a second. Importantly, the process is the intervention. Valuable outcomes are generated independent of any policy change. And therefore, we adapted this for Singapore, and as part of Policy Lab's mandate, as Justin outlined earlier, we pushed it to the highest bar possible. We had 24 participants, 2/3 Singaporeans, 1/3 non-Singaporeans. The international literature suggests 16 to 25 for this method. We used the upper bound. We tested two hypotheses. First, whether unanimous consensus or 100% consensus was achievable in Singapore. And second, whether deliberation could translate into action. Participants generated 67 statements across 4 domains. We built in safeguards. First, against false consensus. Second, protection of dissent. And third, ensure no-go zones were documented immediately. And so what did we find? Let me share 4 sets of findings. First on hypothesis 1, second on hypothesis 2, third on the participant experience, and fourth on key concerns raised. First on hypothesis 1, 23 of 67 participated. Let me repeat that again. 23 of 67 participant-generated statements achieved 100% consensus. This should be read against the threshold. Under majority voting, which is 50.01, many more would have passed. The finding is that 100% consensus, what seemed practically impossible, was realized through this pilot in Singapore. This worked in part because participants showed up willing to listen, willing to be persuaded, willing to find common ground. But it also worked because of Singapore's civic culture, the shared values of consensus over conflict in the paper in 1991, and a sense of we built over decades. The method alone does not guarantee the outcome. The civic culture in Singapore also matters. This is what bridging social capital looks like when the conditions are right. However, the variation across the 4 domains is also instructive. Community life achieved the highest, 14 of 18 statements. Education, 4 of 16. Employment, 4 of 18. But multiculturalism proved the most difficult, 1 of 15. What explains this pattern? I cover 4 points in turn. First, on community life, statements that achieve consensus were aspirational and symmetrical, calling on both locals and foreigners to make effort. But participants also named the fragility of the current equilibrium. Neighborhood interactions were described as hello-goodbye relationships, polite but shallow. Tolerance without trust. The question they had is whether this will hold us together in a crisis. On jobs and education, consensus came through conditionality. The formulation when qualifications are equal allowed participants to affirm citizen priority without abandoning meritocracy. Notably, citizens themselves insisted on this qualification. They did not want unearned advantage. They wanted priority when qualifications were comparable. Third is the most striking finding. Foreign participants endorsed citizen priority. A non-resident participant said Singaporeans should get preferential treatment because to treat them exactly as foreigners, it is just not fair. When citizen priority was framed as recognition of contribution rather than exclusion, foreign participants found it reasonable. They called it legitimate house rules because they would want the same in their own country of origin. Finally, on multiculturalism, only 1 of 15 statements achieved consensus. Participants could listen with respect, acknowledge perspectives they did not share, yet in this case, they could not find formulations everyone could endorse. The question at stake is Singapore's cultural identity anchored after 60 years, or is it continuously, inherently evolving? Conditional terms here in this conversation offered no path forward. This is where the harder work lies. Therefore, hypothesis 1 is supported, but there are nuances to it. On the second finding of hypothesis 2, SMS shared earlier, there was a 48-page residence report. There's also a working group that developed a community project. The community project is pending funding support, but we see that this is bridging social capital becoming collaborative action. Therefore, while deliberation translated into action, hypothesis 2 is partially supported until the community project takes off, and if it takes off. Third, on participant experience, SMS also outlined pre-post surveys captured 3 shifts in participants' attitudes. First, greater perspective taking. Singapore citizens showed the highest gains in comfort engaging with people whose backgrounds differed from their own in the pre-post survey. Second, intellectual humility. Non-residents recorded the largest reduction in certainty that their views were correct. They recalibrated after encountering perspectives they had not previously heard. Third, increased civic efficacy. Participants expressed stronger beliefs that they have a say in what government does and that their voices matter. Beyond this, more than 9 in 10 reported a positive and meaningful experience, as SMS outlined earlier. Finally, key concerns were also raised. Participants surfaced concerns about public communications, that messaging tends to foreground citizen contributions. I beg your pardon, that messaging foregrounds foreign contributions while remaining silent on what citizens contribute. They also found relevant data difficult to locate, transparency without discoverability. Additionally, long-term foreign residents described feeling permanently temporary, wishing to sink roots but perceiving pathways to permanent residence as almost inaccessible. The rational response to permanent temporariness from the foreigners may be precisely the shallow hello-goodbye engagement that participants describe. And so, what were our recommendations? And in the report you will read after this conference, we proposed 3 recommendations. First, to dedicate institutional attention to local foreign relations as a distinct dimension of Singapore's multiculturalism. We have infrastructure on race and religion, we have infrastructure on integration. Notwithstanding this, there is scope to extend and deepen this work. One participant proposed treating foreigners as one of the new cultures or races, given the current population percentage. This articulates an extension of Singapore's founding multicultural logic. Just as the nation invested decades of patient work in building cohesion among Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others, could similar investment be had to address local foreign integration? To that end, we propose two options. Option A would be to expand the mandate of existing bodies such as onepeople.sg or the National Integration Council to include these structured engagements. Option B would be to establish dedicated infrastructure such as a center or an office with a specific mandate on multiculturalism so that they have the resources and attention to strengthen and sustain programming and extend the expertise in this domain. Either approach should recognize that identity and belonging questions cannot be resolved through policy tweaks alone, as SMS also echoed earlier. Second, review public communications with attention to recognition, framing, and data discoverability. To this end, we suggest three areas to consider. First, on recognition, messaging that foregrounds foreign contributions could be balanced with explicit acknowledgement of what citizens contribute to the nation's future. The goal is not to diminish recognition of either group. Rather, the intention is to uplift both in public communications. Second, framing. Policy language that frames citizens as beneficiaries of government generosity, such as various grants, could be reviewed for alternatives that position citizens as stakeholders. Third, data discoverability. Data relevant to local foreign questions could be made more discoverable on official channels. Transparency without discoverability weakens the shared factual baseline that public discourse requires and unfortunately creates space for speculation and misinformation. How policies are communicated, therefore, affects trust independent of the policy itself. Communications, therefore, is vital. Third, we hope to expand this pilot to other constituencies and other contested issues, test whether the findings can replicate and whether we can build a stronger model to build consensus and strengthen bridging social capital. As I conclude, let me return to the poll. How many of you voted yes and how many of you voted no? 23 of 67 statements achieved unanimous consensus. So therefore, I think both of you are right. There are nuances even in finding consensus and finding common ground. It is not so straightforward. Citizens and foreigners in the same room for the consensus conference found common ground, but there's still a lot more of work that needs to be done. Let me close with a quote from one of our founding fathers, Mr. S. Rajaratnam. The more participation there is by the people in the 1,001 activities of society, the greater the measure of democracy. That was his vision of a democracy of deeds. This study tested whether that participatory logic could extend across residency lines, whether locals and foreigners could reason together and find common ground. What we found was heartening and cautionary. Heartening because common ground exists. Participants found it, they built relationships that persisted, they took action together. Cautionary because identity questions, who counts as we, how Singapore's culture should evolve, require sustained engagement, not a single exercise, but patient work over time. The finding is that structured deliberation can build bridging social capital, surface common ground, and catalyze collaboration in Singapore. I emphasize in Singapore because we do not take these conditions for granted. The question now is whether we will invest further in this civic infrastructure. The foundation is there, the method works. What we need is the will to scale it and partners ready to build it with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. The next segment would be a dialogue amongst the panelists and we'll just kind of bleed seamlessly into the Q&A with the audience. But since Nick just presented quite a lot of information, I'll give an opportunity to Don and then SMS on whether you had any reflections you wanted to share about what was just presented or had any clarifying questions for Nick. Over to you, Don. Or what was just noteworthy or interesting to you?
I thought that was and thanks for handing the time to me. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I was intrigued by two things. One, that Nick mentioned that 23 out of 67 statements were able to achieve consensus. And also in the poll that I think there's quite a high percentage of people in this call who didn't think consensus was possible. So it seems like we have space to be more optimistic. And I think that's just the main thought I'm left with. It sounds like we are a little bit down on ourselves about what's possible when it comes to forming consensus. So yeah, that's my key takeaway for the moment. Room for optimism.
Thanks, Don. SMS, are you optimistic about this as well?
Well, I must say that we really didn't quite know what the outcomes would be when we embark on this experiment or this discussion on this potentially very contentious topic of relationships between Singaporeans and foreigners. I would say, firstly, I would set a context by saying that this modality of bringing the group of people to talk about issues, it's not just one session talking about things. There's a significant investment of time, effort, and also a sense of in every person wanting to every person have to be vulnerable to some extent, to create a safe space for one another to share very deeply held beliefs that we may not often express publicly. So it wasn't one session, it was actually over a period of 4 weekends, really a lot of effort. And they showed up full day and on time and prepared to engage one another. And you could certainly see the difference from day one to the final day when they came up with their handbook. So it is an investment of time. And I'm optimistic because I see that participants are willing to put themselves forward, to be vulnerable, to be open, to listen, to argue and disagree one another, but in a more constructive way. So I'm cautiously optimistic. At the same time, I also must add that this modality is part of the broader set of toolkits and a repertoire that I think Don spoke about, that the government and Rich is working on. It's about allowing us to go deeper on specific issues, but that doesn't replace or it's not mutually exclusive all the other tools that we have, from surveys to dialogues to listening points, but each different tool has a different purpose. So I just want to put 2 points that set in context the consensus conference that we heard Nick talked about just now.
Thank you so much, SMS. Since there's one of the things we wanted to talk about has been raised as the highest voted question. One of the issues I wanted to discuss was the issue of inclusion. I suppose the large conversations that Dawn's familiar with facilitating, you really can include all the minority voices. But for smaller groups, such as what Nick has just done, it's often we're not able to include every single minority group, whether it's race or language or religion or people with disabilities or the low-income SES. I wondered if any of you had views on, how to think about this. Inclusion is difficult, challenging, and how do you include sensibly, I suppose, is the question. Maybe to Nick first, then to Don, then to SMS.
Thanks, Justin. I think also I will let Dawn talk about this later, but some time ago she introduced to us a reach versus richness graph, and I thought it would be useful for Dawn to expand on that. On my part, I thought maybe I highlight 3 points that on inclusion specific to the exercise itself. One was that we used basic English as the means, so we didn't have vernacular languages. So I think in that very first top question, it was limited to English-speaking group. That person is right. For this particular experiment, we used basic English as the port. But I think there is also space to do this in vernacular languages because this was a trial and an experiment that we went to go with it. I wanted to share maybe 3 things. One is that on the methodology of inclusion for this particular exercise, we tried to make sure that as much of the diversity across in Singapore, the CMIO, but also of not just that, but also SES and ethnicity was also there. We wanted to say that the process I wanted to say that the process actually expanded the process. So because it was not just one session, in between sessions, we also invited them to go and seek views from others before they came back. And many of the participants also brought those views. They themselves reflected that some of the diversity in the room was not there, and they themselves then tended to bring it into the space. So I think there is room to grow in terms of inclusion, whether it's persons with disabilities, whether it's other races, other ethnicities, and also other nationalities. That's on the research part. On the participant part, comes back to Dawn's invitation. Will you show up? For an SMS point, it requires a lot of commitment from the citizens' part as well. It's 3 Saturdays and a Sunday. And you need to show up for all of it. And then after that, write a report together and then put it together. That is quite a bit of commitment from the citizens itself. So I think while we can provide the space, there also needs to be a matching of intensity and commitment as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. And now we can attribute to Dawn another nifty term, reach versus richness, trade-offs between them.
So I think, yeah, thanks. And I think this is so wonderful because do you know who I first heard the richness and reach framework from? It came from SMS Kiat Hao. When, I don't know if you remember this, Kiat Hao, but you had given a presentation once on the Pioneer Generation Office, and you had shared that framework and it stuck with me. And later on, I sort of ended up using it in the context of citizen engagement. So all credit where it's due. And this framework basically says that there's a natural trade-off between engagements that have high reach, that means can reach many people in a quick amount of time. So surveys is your classic high reach technique, versus high richness. That means you can really get a lot of flavor and texture and nuance, but it therefore is naturally limited to very few people. And so every time I teach or speak to groups about engagement, I often advocate that we use a mixture of high reach and high richness approaches so that the data that comes out eventually is well balanced. As we've already discussed here, the consensus conference is a very high richness approach, but it's only that many people in a room. And of course, the rest of us might be wondering, well, you know what do the rest of us think? Is it really representative of a larger whole? And so I would counsel that if we're using this as a way to develop policy, we would complement a consensus conference with something like a survey or something with a broader reach so that we can test the findings against a larger group of people. Maybe I'll just pause there. Thanks.
Thanks, Dawn. So it sounds like there's reach, the feedback unit, and potentially a sister unit, the richness unit, which is the feed forward unit.
Yes.
SMS Kiat Hao, any thoughts on this?
Thanks, Dawn and Nicholas. Indeed, that different tools have different role to play, and the consensus forum kind of methodology or modality allows people facilitating to go much deeper into perhaps very deeply held assumptions. So someone mentioned in the chat a question about a safe space. Indeed, you can't just bring a group of people in, 20, 30 people. Let's talk about contentious topic. What do you feel about foreigners? What do you feel about this issue or that issue? And especially when they don't know each other and they feel that they might be judged if they say something that's non-conventional, it's very difficult to have that unpacking of assumptions and to be able to be frank with one another, and much less seeking any consensus of any sort. So I would say that in the first place, you really need to have that modality and I'm very glad that we try out this consensus conference method to have that safe space. And that allows us to go much deeper and create a richness of perspective. But it doesn't mean that it is representative naturally. That's why you have to be complementary with, you have to complement it with different tools like surveys, listening points, allow you to iterate between the different tools in your toolkit. So I think it's a policymaker or someone doing research, the ability to balance between rich and richness and to find the right modality to achieve the outcome. The second point I will want to just touch on is the inclusivity one. I think it's very important. Today, we look at the diversity in our society, and we see it across the world in different parts of the world. It no longer just about traditional indicators of, say, Nicholas talked about CMIO earlier, or just SES, or race, religion, or language, which are the traditional markers of identity. But our society has become much more diverse, different tribes, different causes, different passions that people have. How do you bring it together? And I think that it will be a challenge that many societies will face, especially in the age of AI and digital media. So I think it is onus of all of us to find ways to be inclusive. And Rich has been trying to go to where people are. So it's not just about listening points or surveys and people come to us. Our officers and our partners find ways to reach out to people, halfway houses, talking to people who may not be on digital platforms, even in vernacular. Our seniors, for example, even Getai, because many seniors go to Getai, they may not come to reach a listening point. But we want to reach out to people and to bring their perspective in, because we believe that every voice matters. So I think this is a work in progress, but I think we are building on a very, very good foundation.
Thanks, SMS. You've also kind of pointed to and answered the question that has the current highest vote, which is most people self-censor when discussing sensitive topics like Gaza and all that, and because they fear social and professional consequences. So the question was, how can we create truly safe spaces where people can express different views on contentious issues? So I was reflecting also when Nick did the consensus conference. There was a participant that said, I would rather this process, not just be on the surface. We really want to go deep. And so I maybe want to go one round again to get reflections on how do you manage this space whereby a difficult or sensitive issue is talked about safely, but not too surface, so that it doesn't actually excavate a useful discussion. I suppose to kind of at risk of revealing too much about my marital woes, I'm thinking if I have a problem with my wife, right? Usually, like all of you are saying, like it takes so much effort to dialogue and deliberate and come to. So sometimes you sweep it under the carpet, and you sweep it under the carpet and not good. But when you talk about it, if you talk about it productively, that's good, because you land at a point. Now we understand each other, we know where we're going. But sometimes there's the risk, I guess, also of you talk about it and you realize, oh my gosh, we are so fundamentally different. Maybe we shouldn't be. Maybe we can't agree on these deep divides. So what do? I guess that's a kind of an analogy towards also public deliberation. So maybe to Nick first, how do you hold this space from the consensus conference, right? What's the too difficult and too deep and dangerous? What's too surface and useless? And how do you hold this middle productive space?
Thanks, Justin. First, maybe I thought I share an anchor as part of the research approach. Typically for deliberations, we tend to use the rational logical arguments. But for this experiment, we expanded public reason to also include emotion and lived reality, so the narratives and the stories. And earlier when I shared there were 3 safeguards that we put in place. So the first was against false consensus. So if a participant at any point expressed a different view, and then at the large group went along with it, we would intentionally check back with that person to bring that view back into the space, so that it prevented social conformity bias. So that's the first one, against false consensus. The second one was the protection of dissent. Basically, we will start with a statement where everybody's in the center of the room, and then they need to move to whether they could live with it or they could not live with it. If people were unsure, uncertain, or they couldn't live with it for some reason they could not articulate, we will actively invite them to the cannot live with it, so that they do not need to conform to a view that doesn't sit with them well. And we actively encouraged and we make sure that we protected dissent or a lack of ability to so-called conform to where everybody else is moving. The third one was that no-go zones were not softened. The moment something landed in no-go, and that's where it was, we couldn't find, immediately it went into the no-go zone. There was no further compromise, softening of the language, because the power lies with the proposer. So I think those four in a nutshell: one, using emotion and narrative as an anchor to complement rational logical arguments; two, protection against false consensus, protection against dissent, and then do not soften the no-go zones. That enabled us to make sure that the process, nobody needed to conform to it, but they were able to articulate their views genuinely. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Over to you, Don. Is there a safe, but not too safe, but productive conversation you think needs to be balanced?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think this is absolutely a key, maybe the key question. And I thought I'd just bring up two things. One is this idea of the container. So in the field of organization development and community engagement, we often talk about container building. And container is distinct from the content that is in the container, right? So in Nick's case, the content is the conversation around local foreign integration. But the container usually refers to the psychosocial environment. Like, how do I feel when I come into this consensus conference? Do I trust the people around me? Do I feel comfortable sharing what I really feel? Or shall I just stick to very safe, dissent-free type comments? And I think someone in the video we shared at the start also made that point that they weren't sure how to relate to each other at the start. So pay attention to container building. This would refer to things like, sort of power dynamics. How do you build relationship between people so that there's a level of trust before the conversation starts? The second thing I would say then, if container building is in fact important, it always helps to have facilitators around. I think in the consensus conference example that Nicholas mentioned, you did bring in a group of people to help facilitate the conversation. So these are people who are trained in group dynamics, in conversation techniques that help to elicit people and enable them to speak more frankly. And then the third thing I'll just say, which is what Nick already said, but I really wanted to reinforce it, is making room for emotions to show up. My sense is that the Singapore culture, we tend to sort of hold emotion with some ambiguity, right? We don't really like it. We're not comfortable when it shows up, certainly not when we have policy conversations. But the reality is that any kind of engagement is a human enterprise. And of course, humans are vessels of emotion. And the more vested people are in the topic, the more you should expect that emotions will show up. And when emotions do show up, it means you're really hitting at something that matters to people. So I would say not that we should really make people get angry or upset or anything, but when it does show up, that is a perfectly natural thing to happen when we're dealing with difficult issues. So make space for it, and then you would have container building and facilitators to help manage what happens when emotion shows up. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. And I would like to add that, I watched Consensus Conference up front, and Nick really found a superb group of facilitators. They were saying, like there was a participant and clearly you could see that they were kind of like tired and they want to go along with it. But they said, no, that's your view. Don't be embarrassed about it. Hold the view. And we were all so impressed, right? You have permission to feel how you feel and acknowledge that. So that was great. SMS Kiat Hao, any reflections?
Well, thanks, Justin. I was listening carefully to what Dawn and Nicholas were saying too. I want to add that my wife is the one who's always right. There's the mantra that I take, but just jokes aside. I think this is always a work in progress. And I think being a work in progress, it depends on many factors, not just the container, which Dawn talked about, how we set it up, how we have very good facilitators, the people coming in, what kind of mindset, what kind of attitude they take, the temperament of the few participants. There's so many factors. But I maybe thought that my own reflection after witnessing or participating in the consensus conference, and from a policy point of view, how we think about it at Reach, I thought there may be 3 points. First, I don't think we can upfront dictate a success indicator that is a KPI that everybody must have consensus on, or you have a certain proportion or threshold of 70% consensus. I think if you set that kind of expectation upfront, we are setting ourselves for failure. And the reason why I say that, because it's not the end outcome that matters as much as the journey. how people go through it, how people share, and whether they reach consensus on many topics or many statements or not is really a matter of the process. And I don't think it's a failure of the platform if at the end of the whole session, people said, I don't agree with everything, what each other say. And to me, it's not a failure. It's actually a part of the process. So that's the first thing. Right, so we shouldn't artificially try to shape a certain outcome from any of this process. The second point I will say is that actually these are very basic advice that we give to everyone. It's very hard for us to do so in the day-to-day life. For example, not judging, listening to understand, listening to find common ground. For example, empathize with each other because of shared humanity, shared beliefs that we have. We're all Singaporeans, we live on this different island. What matter to us and our loved ones in this society? There are many shared, I would say, aspirations, shared concerns, and common ground that we can build on. But to able to get there without judging, without applying labels to each other, and giving each other a benefit of doubt is always easier said than done. Because the biggest challenge to that is not the other party, but actually ourselves. That we are own blinkers, our own biases, and can we overcome those ourselves? And if everyone in participating in platforms like these are willing to go through it and willing to challenge ourselves and willing to listen, I think then there's a higher chance of us able to come to have a constructive and fruitful conversation with one another. And we are better off as people and better off as human beings after that. So the second advice is often there, but it's not easy to do. The third is about someone talked about having a safe space. I think it's getting harder and harder to do so because of social media. It's so easy to be someone anonymous with their account, to cancel someone, to send a very nasty comment, or to dox somebody, to find out where the person is, why he says some things. And it's so easy to judge one another over social media. And it's actually harder for us to withdraw and say that, let's give each other a benefit of doubt. So I would say these are all very basic things, but not so easy to do, especially in a modern city like Singapore. But from a policy point of view, I think modalities like consensus conference are very useful because it allows policymakers or even government officials like us to also make sure that we don't have our biases, to make sure that we remove our blinkers. Why did certain groups say certain thing? Why did certain community advocate for a certain position? Why do certain interest groups lobbying for certain maybe certain projects or initiatives? And to understand why they're doing so, to understand the motivations, and to say how can we work together. That also requires us as policymakers, as regulators, as people who are in a position to make decisions, to do the extra step of trying to understand. And I think some of these feedback and learnings from experiments like consensus conference gives us the extra toolkits to able to do so. And as Prime Minister talked about, a we for society, working people coming together, building bridges to build a better Singapore. And I think all of us should have the humility and open-mindedness to actually step out of comfort zone to do something different. So to me, that is one of the key takeaways I have.
Thanks, SMS. And in relation to the we first, there was one issue we wanted to discuss also with you, and it's the issue of who is the we, because in we first society, I guess the we could be the people who are like us. So that's, bonding social capital. But the we could also mean people who are not like us. So that's why bridging social capital is important. And I think from Social Lab survey this morning, it's one of the findings was that, the more diverse friends you have from different backgrounds, the more there's social cohesion and trust. And so that seems to highlight that, having friends of diverse background is good. But I don't think that also implies that having friends who are similar to you is bad. So I wanted to get your views on that, because we say echo chambers are bad. But echo chambers is our instinct to find people who share the same values and views as us. So I think in the sociological literature, before the fancy terms of bonding, they called it mechanical solidarity. Basically, you form ties with people who are same as you, right? So the sameness also has an interesting implication. when I am together with others who are same as me, the emotional ties tend to also be stronger, and it's easier to get into a group who's same as you. When you want to get into a group, the solidarity that comes out of difference, it's a little bit harder, right? The emotional ties may be less, but it's a solidarity made out of difference and interdependence. And so I wanted to kind of gather, it seems to be such a delicate balance in a multicultural society that we want to encourage people to find your own tribe and respect that. But we also don't want you to, practice some kind of cultural chauvinism that your tribe now is better than the others. And I wondered, maybe Dawn, if you had any thoughts first, and maybe to Nick and then SMS.
Well, I mean, I would just say that you've pressed on the nub of the issue. I think that, so I love the language of bonding and bridging capital. And I think what the behavioral and social sciences have shown us time and again is that the bonding capital, or this penchant for tribalism, comes very naturally to us. We look for people who are similar to us. It's the easy thing to do. And we are social creatures as well. So we want to affiliate with people who are like us. So what I would, my sense is that we don't really need to do too much. People will find their own tribe. That just naturally happens. But where the bulk of the energy and the work and the effort will need to be is the bridging capital, the building of links outside of your own tribe. That's the really hard work. That's been the Singapore story over the last 60 years. And I think, Nick, one of the things you mentioned when you were giving your presentation that stayed with me was that it's the cultural investment we've made with the bridging capital that in part made the consensus possible, right? So we need to continue with that. I think the government will have to take a large part of that role because it just comes so unnaturally to humanity to do this. And that, in fact, has been a big priority for the government all these years. But I think the invitation is for us also to do likewise. And I was listening into the earlier presentation, and what Matthew Matthews said really stayed with me. This idea of say no to homophily, right? Say no to just having friends who are like you. So I think his invitation and counsel to us was to see if we can form friendships outside of our natural circle. It's really hard to do. And even as he was talking, I was doing a sort of stock take of who are people I would consider close friends, and do I have anybody who's different from me in as many ways as possible. So I thought that was a really good call to action, and I would just reiterate that for us to find friendships and links with people outside of our natural setting. Yeah.
Thanks, Dawn. Nick, any reflections on this?
Yeah, just two quick thoughts. I just want to echo what Dawn said, and I think this is bridging social capital is where the harder work lies. And it is tremendously difficult. All the survey results that came out from IPS Social Lab, including at last year's SP, showed signs of strain. And I would say that this is where the harder work lies. The second point is something I've been thinking about for some time. And when Prime Minister came up with the We First Society and the framing, I wonder whether that will help us unlock the us versus them. If we see society as we, that encapsulates the us and them. And so we move the we first to a sort of a society that says and, us and them, versus rather than us or them. I wonder if that was a way forward for us to think about we first as something that allows us to be a society which says and rather than or versus. Yeah. Thanks. SMS.
Over to you, SMS.
A few points, my reflections. I think when I think about we first, it's not about defining who the we, because I think that defeats the purpose. I think the most important spirit of a we first is really as long as it's not me first. And it's not me, my interests, or my circle of friends or loved ones or family, and exclusion of others. It's really an open invitation to do things and think about people beyond just my immediate concerns. And I think that is really the foundation bedrock of society in the Singapore we want to build. When we build Singapore, the home that is not just for ourselves, but a more expansionary, more inclusive way of thinking about how we think about the society. So for me, that's how I think about we first. As long as it's not me first and all about myself or my immediate family or my immediate interests. The second point about, I want to take out what Justin said. I don't think echo chambers having tribes or having a community in and of itself is a bad thing. My own personal experiences, I've been have friends, for example, I've been supporting a number of charitable organizations, and one of the organizations that's really left a very deep impression on me is the Singapore Children Cancer Foundation. And I've seen how the community comes together, the parents and caregivers for those children with cancer and for those who survived. It's a very strong community, and they find strength and solidarity and support from one another. Is it a bad thing? I don't think so. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I think it is a bad thing when we have groups of people come together and become just excluding other people and my own interests, my own beliefs, and not prepared to have an open mind, open heart to listen to perspectives from outside or outside the group. So the us versus them that Nicholas talked about. So I think in that case, then it's actually the detriment to social cohesion and trust. But how do we create an environment in which we are bringing people together, bringing different groups together, allow them to interact, allow them to challenge the assumptions that they hold about other groups. And I think that is the difficult thing, especially in societies where there are very many enclaves and tribes, and where social media creates that kind of echo chamber effect for those groups online. So that's the second point, is about creating the condition. And to build on what Dawn said, we've been doing so for the last 60 years in Singapore, creating the common spaces, whether in our residential neighborhood estates, in our schools, in shared experiences like national service. It's about creating the spaces where people come together, regardless of their beliefs, the background, where they stay, and interact with one another. Because the easiest way, the most simple way to break barriers is to have the interaction at a personal level, at a very intimate level. And I think that's important. And finally, to build on what Nicholas said, talk about social capital. And social capital, like other financial capital, it compounds. So it's really about how to build that foundation and allow it to compound over generations. And I think we are building on very strong foundation here at Singapore, put in place over the last 60 years by our pioneer generation, our Merdeka generation. And every day, each of us, as stakeholders of this place, little red dot we call Singapore, actually each of us have the ability to invest in it, to build on it, and nurture it for the next generation. So I think that is really the responsibility and a call to action for all of us.
Thanks for your wisdom, SMS. I kind of feel like I need to bank in some into my social capital CPF. Then, wow, compound interest, then retirement ready. Wow, where are all my friends? Thanks for the wisdom, but I need to squeeze out one last snippet of wisdom from all of you before we let you leave. So maybe parting thoughts or reflections from all our speakers before we go, starting from Nicholas, then Dawn, then SMS. Nicholas, over to you.
Thanks, Justin. I think we started the consensus conference experiment not knowing whether we will arrive at consensus. And in the process of recruiting the participants, engaging with them, working through the entire process, I think what I leave is one key takeaway. And SMS and Dawn both alluded to it earlier. And I think there's something exceptionally special about Singapore. For us to find common ground, where in many other countries are deeply polarized, divided, is something special, and I thought something we should quietly applaud ourselves for. Even though the sample was small, I thought it's not just about the consensus conference, but it's about the civic infrastructure that has been built over decades that enables this and gives us the small opportunity and a small chance of finding consensus when many other societies can't. And so I conclude by thinking, I think the we in Singapore is strong. There's a strong foundation, and I think we should build on this. Hopefully, as SMS says, it will compound from our generation to the next after inheriting it from the previous generation. So I think there's strong infrastructure, civic infrastructure. Let's build on it. We have a small chance to strengthen bridging social capital and hopefully try to reduce polarization in Singapore. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Parting thoughts, take-home points, Dawn?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on this thing about bonding versus bridging and when tribalism becomes problematic, right? I mean, we say it's good that we form tribes and we support each other, but when we look outside and we see the them, and when does that become a problem? And I think it's when one tribe looks at another and does not just see difference, but sees them as stupid or evil or bad or does not deserve to exist, right? So when we treat them with hostility. So what is the antidote to hostility? I don't think it's possible to achieve like great oneness with everybody in a diverse society. But I think the first step is just looking at the other and feeling curious. The person who has a different point of view was not born with this view. It is their life experience and whatever they've gone through that has led them to this difference. And I think it behooves us when we approach a person who's different from ourselves just to start with curiosity. And so I suppose I leave that thought with all of us that curiosity is the beginning of a We First society, that we look at the other person and say, well, how did they come to that point of view? And just explore, keep asking questions. And even if full consensus is not possible with the other, at least we come with a better understanding and hopefully some empathy. So yeah, curiosity is my word to end with.
Thanks, Don. You have the final word, SMS.
Thank you very much. I agree what Nicholas and Don said. Add another word in is curiosity is important. Compounding is important. The other word I'll add is choice. Every one of us have the ability to make a decision, and building bridges across communities, building bridges with another party, another group, it all boils down to choice. It's about choosing connections over division in the workplace, in every conversation that you have, every online exchange you have, or even at the dinner table with your family members and your wife, right? It's about having building that connection, listening attentively, keeping an open mind, and giving someone the benefit of doubt and respect. So choice, each of us can play a part. And in this age of echo chambers and division, and Nicholas alluded to it, many countries all around the world, and almost every part of the world, are facing a lot of challenges trying to ensure a more cohesive society, peace and stability across different groups of people. We have something precious here in Singapore, very precious, that we built up over the last 60 years. And we want to make sure that it continues to grow, be sustained, and you cannot assume that it will always be there. And our children, our grandchildren will inherit a more harmonious society, a more cohesive society. It cannot be assumed. And something that we have to work very hard on every generation, and every one of us can play a part. So I call upon everyone that all of us has the ability to make a difference, add to this social capital that we have here in Singapore, and make sure it compounds to a wonderful society for our next generation, our children and our grandchildren.
Thank you, SMS. And thanks to all the panelists for all your insights and wisdom. Before I hand it to Laurel, I would like to say that me and my wife have lots of divided opinions, but there's one thing we share in common, right? So we have two small kids, and then nowadays they say, want to watch TV. No, me first, me first. And then both of us say, no, we first. Over to you, Laurel.
Okay, thank you so much, Justin. And thank you everyone for joining us today at the opening sessions for Singapore Perspectives 2026 Fraternity. And I also want to give a big thank you to all our panelists for sharing your interesting and insightful perspectives. I hope everyone has enjoyed the discussions as much as I have, and also found the sessions insightful. The second half of the conference will take place next Monday, January 26th. This will be at the SENS Expo and Convention Center. We will send you a reminder email by the end of this week with important details for the conference. Before you sign off, please do take a couple of minutes to complete a short feedback form for the conference. You can access the form by scanning the QR code that's going to appear on the screen. We appreciate any comments, suggestions that you can share to help us improve future editions of Singapore Perspectives. Thank you very much, and see you next week at SENS Expo.